Hi, it's Trey Griggs with Obsidian Wisdom. Today we discuss navigating employer benefits and pension options. Do you want to maximize your contributions to your employer sponsored retirement plans, such as your 401k and 403b? Do you want to take advantage of tax deferred growth opportunities? Are you interested in receiving free money in retirement? In that case, it might make sense for you to maximize your contributions to your employer sponsored plans. Most employer plans, when you talk about 401k, 403b, you normally have access to an employer match. Now, the match can vary. A lot of the times I see 3%. Sometimes we have safe harbor plans where if you contribute 3%, they'll match the first 3%. But then for the next 2% to be achieved, you have to actually put in double that amount, which means you have to contribute another 4% to get up to the 5% match. The way that works is they're normally only going to contribute about 0.5% for each additional percentage after that. Now, the numbers vary. I've seen some as high as 6% where they'll match up to that amount. Whatever that match amount is, it normally makes sense to get the free money. If I am putting in $100 and before I go to sleep, I have $100 contributed by my employer, that means my $100 turned into $200, which is a 100% return on your investment. That employer match can oftentimes help offset the higher costs that we sometimes find in employer sponsored plans. And it can even help us overcome the lower ability to customize as far as the investment options. There's normally not as many options inside of your 401k and other employer sponsored plans. Many times it's important to note that you're not going to be able to retire just off of your contributions to your employer sponsored plans, especially if you're talking about your IRA and your Roths. Between the IRA and the Roth themselves, you can only contribute $6,500 in 2024. And then when we talk about maximizing that amount, we may be able to take advantage of that catch up provision, which is an additional $1,000 that you can contribute each year after you turn 50. And that turning 50 doesn't mean you have to literally be 50 years old. It just means within that calendar year, if you are turning 50 that year, then you're able to contribute that extra $1,000. Now, it's important to note that you cannot contribute $6,500 or $7,500 if you're 50 or older into your Roth and then another $7,500 into your IRA. The way the government has designed those instruments, you actually are going to share that contribution. So, for example, if you put $3,000 into your Roth, then you can only put $4,500 into your IRA. You have to have $7,500 in total between those two accounts. Now, this naturally means that you cannot simply retire just by investing in your IRA or your Roth IRA because $7,500 a year is not going to be enough for you to have the amount that you need in retirement. And that's why for many people, we normally have to have diverse streams of income. And I'll put a link to another video where I talk about some of these additional streams of income that you can create. Now, if you're someone who has access to a 401k or a 403b, if you're a public employee, well, now you're able to contribute $23,000 each year into your retirement account. And then when you're 50 or older, you have that catch up provision, which now allows you to contribute $30,000 into that retirement account, which is very beneficial for most people. For example, if you make $100,000 a year and you're contributing $30,000 a year, that means you're contributing 30% of your income, which for most retirement plans is going to be a successful strategy. If you can contribute 20% or higher, for most people, that tends to work. I've even seen numbers where you can contribute 10%, but you have low expenses, or maybe you have a pension that you have access to, and we'll talk about that later in this video. If you have those options, then you may not need as much to be able to retire, but for most people, if you can get in that 20% range, you're normally in a good spot. But with that said, I always tell people just start where you're at. If you can start in your 20s and you're only contributing $5 a day, I can show you the numbers where that means you'll have $1 million in retirement at 65. In my opinion, I find it's very important to build the proper habits. And I know some people will say, like Dave Ramsey is huge on saying, well, you got to pay off all your debt first. And, pump your brakes. I'll talk about that as well. But I find building the habit of investing your money, getting in the habit of putting your money to work so that you don't have to work, so that one day all of your money is working and you aren't working at all, except for fulfillment and happiness and joy. Well, I believe that that is what we all should be going for. And sometimes if you're just focused on paying off the debt, while that is fun, you may actually be frustrated when you get out of debt and you're just at zero. You don't actually have any money that's working to make you more money. I find that even if it's the smallest amount, almost think if you're writing a story or you're writing an email, if you have a template that just gets you started where you're not staring at a blank page, it just helps your mind to get flowing. I find that if we build the habit of investing our money, even if it's just $50 from every paycheck, we will see that reward, that benefit, where we'll look in a couple years and we'll say, oh my gosh, the majority of Americans do not have access to $1,000, and I have $1,000 saved. I have $2,000 saved. I'm generating $100 every single month in revenue. However that looks, it just feels a little bit different, in my opinion, where you're not staring at the blank page trying to figure out what to do now. We already have a strategy. We already have our portfolio design. We already have our money being put to work. And all I'm going to do is pour gasoline on my strategy by putting more money in when I get out of debt. Now, another benefit of maximizing your employer sponsored retirement plan is you have tax deferred status. Now, when it comes to understanding the tax advantages of your pre retirement accounts, this is something that really can vary depending on our own unique situation. High level, the idea back in 1980 was okay, taxes are at historical highs. Up to 90% of your income can be taxed. As a result, we created this instrument called the 401k. You're able to defer your taxes in the present to pay lower taxes in the future when you retire. This strategy worked perfectly for those in the 1980s who are retiring today. They went from $100,000 being taxed close to 60% to $100,000 in 2024 being taxed closer to 20%. Now, when it comes to those preparing to retire in the next 5 years, the question becomes, what do I think is going to happen to the taxes? Our taxes are already at historical lows and our debt is already at historical highs. We have $34 trillion in debt. We only have 7 tax brackets today, which means it takes a lot more effort to be able to actually lower your tax bracket. You won't be able to just save 20, 30% of your salary and then lower your tax bracket. Because there's only 7 of them, you may actually be stuck in your bracket. Now, I have another video and I'll put a link to it where I go over some of those tax considerations where we talk about looking at our brackets. If I take a certain amount of income and it pushes me into a new bracket, it might be better from a tax perspective to stay in a lower bracket. Now, high level, the way these pre-tax considerations look, if you're someone who has a high amount of income, then you know that you're always at risk of having your taxes increase. When we talk about raising taxes, it's normally going to be on the wealthy. With that said, even if you maximize that $30,000, it's probably not going to lower you in a different bracket because you're already making too much money. So, from that perspective, for most people making within that top 10% of income, you probably just maximize your 401ks and your other retirement accounts, and then you just pay whatever taxes you have because you're probably still going to be in the highest tax brackets. Now, on the other end, if you're in the lowest tax brackets, it probably doesn't matter for you either way because you're going to be in the lowest tax brackets. You rarely hear the government saying, let's figure out how to raise taxes on the poor. So if you're in the lowest tax brackets, you're probably going to continue being in the lowest tax brackets. With that said, you can invest in your 401k and other pre-tax accounts, lower your tax burden today, and you probably won't be paying higher taxes in the future. It probably works for you either way. Now, for the middle 50% of Americans, I normally tell you more times than not to only diversify your income, but to diversify your taxes. That is why for me, I normally love to have a portion of your income in pre-tax and a portion of your income in after-tax. A portion of income that is going to be taxed as regular income in retirement. That's what happens with your pre-tax investments. Your 401k and your 403b and these other accounts, that income has not been taxed yet. Uncle Sam said, I'm going to get at least one bite of this apple, so I will tax this as normal income when you retire. Not to mention the required minimum distributions and the fact that you can't access this money before 59 and a half without paying a penalty. And you're not really promised any sort of a return. If I told you that I needed to lock up your money for 20, 30, 40 years, and you can't touch it, but I also don't promise you any sort of a return, how would you feel about that opportunity? You probably wouldn't feel that great about it. But with that said, it does have the tax deferred advantage. So for most people, you put a portion in tax deferred, and then you have a portion of your income that's already been taxed that you're investing in the traditional stock market, and we consider that your after tax investments. Now, granted, you could also invest in a real estate or business. Again, this is after tax, so it's treated a little bit differently. That way, you have a portion of your money in retirement that is going to be taxed as normal income, and then you give yourself the opportunity for a portion of your income in retirement to be taxed at a more favorable tax rate, whether that's capital gains because it's in the stock market, rental income because it's in real estate, or whether you have your profits in a business. There's a lot of opportunity for you to have a more favorable tax treatment in retirement when you have your money in these particular assets. Now, when it comes to diversifying your employer-sponsored retirement plans, we find that you don't normally have the ability to customize it as much as if you had your own IRA. Your own IRA would be at any sort of a brokerage. You may have a Robinhood account. I have all my accounts held with Charles Schwab. That's my custodian. And then you have access to all of the accounts that that brokerage or custodian has within their normal portfolio. And so you definitely have more customizable options when it comes to that. When you look at your 401k, your 403b, and other employer-sponsored plans, they normally have maybe 5, maybe 10 options, but it's just not as many. And they're normally going to be within the safe, moderate, and aggressive options. And then they may be actively versus passively, but for most of them, they're going to be actively managed, which means you might pay more in funds. Now, some of you might be tempted to look at target date funds because it kind of takes the guesswork out of choosing the retirement plan. You simply have the year that you retire, you choose the target date fund in that year, and then they'll naturally adjust your investments from there. I tend to find that this is either something relatively simple that you could do for yourself, or when it comes to that cost, you could pay a fiduciary financial advisor to do those allocations, create a retirement plan, and manage all of your funds for you. And it will be roughly that same cost of just paying someone to manage your investments. I tend to find you get more bang for your buck to find a fiduciary holistic financial planner, and then you pay them and they manage everything for you. That's just what I've seen, and that's my opinion on the matter. But you may find it works best for you to have a target date fund. And if it works for you, it works for me. If you found value in this video, I ask you to like and subscribe so you continue receiving valuable insights on how to build your own wealthy retirement system. Until next time, stay safe and enjoy life.